Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Lawrence W. Reed became president of FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, in 2008. Prior to that, he served for 20 years as president of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Midland, Michigan. He also taught economics full-time from 1977 to 1984 at Northwood University in Michigan and chaired its Department of Economics from 1982 through 1984. He holds a BA in economics from Grove City College and a Master of Arts degree in history from Slippery Rock State University. He holds 2 honorary doctorates, one from Central Michigan University and Northwood University. Larry Reed has authored over 1,000 newspaper columns and articles and dozens of articles in magazines and journals in the United States and abroad. He is frequently interviewed on radio talk shows and has appeared as a guest on numerous television programs, including those anchored by Judge Andrew Napolitano and John Stossel on Fox Business News. His interests in political and economic affairs have taken him as a freelance journalist to 81 countries on 6 continents. Now, Larry Reed.
Well, Larry Reed, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you, Bob.
You're the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE. FEE.org is the website. What is FEE? I guess just briefly explain that, if you could, please.
I'd be happy to. Bob, we're a private, nonprofit educational foundation. All of our income is derived from contributions, and our focus is on young people, high school and college age in particular, and we aim to educate and inspire them with ideas of individual liberty, personal responsibility and character, small government, private property, the values that we think are what really define America and have made America great.
And I know sometimes they call FEE the oldest or the original libertarian think tank. Leonard Reed founded it some years ago. Is that an accurate description?
Well, we are the oldest, that's right. In 1946, we were the first in America and are the oldest free market think tank in this country. And I think there's only one in the world, in fact, that might have beaten us by perhaps a year or so. But otherwise, we've been around a long time.
Well, I know Jeffrey Tucker was in that chair about a year ago from right now, and he's one of your employees at FEE, and I think really doing a great job pumping up the presence of that. Now, you've edited a book that's just been released recently titled Excuse Me, Professor, Challenging the Myths of Progressivism. And the introduction says, though it often emanates from the ivory towers of academia, progressivism is a dead-end philosophy. Its central notion is that an educated elite should plan and engineer societies by the use of centralized power. So, I don't know, educated elite, that sounds like people who know things and can plan a better life for us. Is that the way things really work or should work?
Well, you've heard the old phrase that the beginning of wisdom is the understanding of how little you really know. And I think a person to truly be educated has to come to grips with the fact that as much as he may know, there's a universe of knowledge out there that he doesn't know. There's an awful lot of pretense to knowledge, people who think they know enough to plan the lives and the economies of other people. But when you look very deeply, you find that in most cases they have a hard enough time planning for themselves and their own lives. All of us have a full-time job and then some, simply planning our own lives.
Our own and our families.
That's right. To take on the task of planning for other people means simply that you're arrogant enough to think that you know how to run their lives better than they do.
And what type of preferences everybody has and things like that. So one of the chapters of this book, there's 51 myths, I think there is. One is the more complex the society, the more government control we need. And we were talking beforehand, I think I mentioned that in Sedgwick County, south central Kansas, we have like a dozen government planning organizations. It just seems like there's just way too much planning, but that's what bureaucrats have a it's like their DNA to plan for people.
Yeah, it sure is. And that's one of the reasons, I think, among many, to keep government small in the first place. Because the moment people have power, and this is true not only at the national level, but at the most local levels too, with power, they all of a sudden get the notion that they know what's best, and that it's okay to impose on other people what they think is best for them, whether or not the outcome is a good one or not. And I think that each and every person has a full-time job in their hands, just managing their own affairs, let alone planning for others.
Well, speaking about complexity, I know one of the things that Leonard Read, the founder of FE, wrote was iPencil.
Yes.
And we've talked about that quite a bit on Wichita Liberty TV. The Competitive Enterprise Institute made a little movie out of iPencil. And it's all about talking about how to build a pencil, something that's so simple, something so inexpensive, people will just give them to you. I mean, they're that low cost. But there's not even one person in the world who knows how to make a pencil from start to end.
That's right, and that's a classic essay by the founder of our organization. His name was Leonard Read, no relation, but a wonderful man. And his whole point in the essay, which he wrote as if the pencil itself is doing the talking.
iPencil.
That's right. Is to explain how complicated the production is of something as simple as a pencil. If somebody told you that you had to start entirely from scratch without any of the knowledge or expertise of any other person and make a pencil, you'd quickly discover you'd have to be a miner, you'd have to be a logger, you'd have to be endless other skilled artisans.
Like who built the chainsaw that the logger uses? You have to be an engineer and all sorts of things.
That's right. And yet, without any mastermind or central planner or all-powerful controller at the top, pencils happen. They happen because of the profit motive, because of the price system that comes together or brings all these talents together. And it's the same reason that you have coffee practically at your doorstep every day. It originates 5,000 miles away. And not because anybody who was part of the coffee making process knew you or liked you, but because profit, incentive, the price system brought them all together and produced something that a consumer was willing to pay for.
And it's remarkable, I think, how something that's relatively simple, the price of something, contains a wealth of knowledge and information about the relative value of certain inputs compared to other things. And I know government oftentimes tries to meddle with prices. I think even after natural disasters, like after a hurricane or something, there will be anti-gouging laws. But what's the impact of those? I mean, do they really do any good for the...
Oh, they make a lot of politicians feel better about themselves.
We're protecting you from greed.
That's right, but they usually don't cause more of what's needed to actually be supplied. I mean, if you've got a crisis or an emergency, a disaster type situation, which causes a dramatic reduction in the supply of something or a dramatic increase in the demand for something, well, high prices actually are the cure for the problem. This is what politicians like to come in and say, oh, we'll prevent that from happening. We'll keep prices low as if nothing had happened. But if you allow prices to be adjust to the changing conditions of the marketplace, in this case, a shortage of supply or an increase in demand, that will actually send a signal that, hey, more of this item is needed, and it's needed here, and it's needed now. And there's no more effective mechanism for meeting the needs of consumers than prices, not the edicts of politicians.
So I think I heard maybe Walter Williams or somebody say, okay, there's been a hurricane. The rise in the price of plywood, let's say, might inspire someone here in Wichita to buy a bunch of plywood, rent a truck, and drive it to Florida where they need it and charge enough to make it worthwhile to do.
Sure.
So they're having to pay more for their plywood, but they have plywood that they otherwise might not have.
That's right, and there have been entire industries created because of this kind of situation. This is how the oil business got started. We used to light our homes with whale oil through the first half of the 19th century. But we weren't doing anything to increase the supply of whale. So the price of whale oil went through the roof, and we didn't interfere with that. But the high price sent a signal, hey, go find an alternative. And that's what gave birth to the oil industry.
Okay, well, very good. We're going to take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Larry Reed, who is president of the Foundation for Economic Education. In the prior segment, we talked a little bit about prices, but I think profit goes along with the prices in a free market enterprise. And one of the things we're grappling with here in Kansas now is that we have really very little school choice programs, very little few charter schools, a small tax credit scholarship program, not much school choice at all. Yet this year we've got to come up with a new school financing formula. Seems like now is the time we could get something done with school choice. But what we run into is the opponents to school choice say, you know, you're going to have for-profit companies come in and run these charter schools. And they say with a straight face, the only way a company can make a profit running a school is to either overcharge people or to skimp on quality education.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's a myth that this is why we send children to the second grade, to learn basic things. And some of the advocates for compulsory monopoly education just don't understand the importance of profit. This should be elemental to our understanding of how the world works. We have a national education crisis by almost any measure, but it's not in the things in the schools that are provided by for-profit firms. It's in the part that's provided by the supposedly nonprofit government.
Schools.
Yeah, where do schools get their pencils and chalkboards? I mean, from people who donate them? No, from companies who make them and make them for a profit. Very little that gets done in the world gets done because of somebody's desire to sacrifice themselves and produce something for somebody else at a loss. I mean, not even the unions who make this anti-profit case run themselves into the ground at a loss. I mean, they too are looking to make money, but they're just opposed to other people making it.
And so it's really funny too, because the school systems, they want us to earn profits in our businesses so that we have profits we can pay them taxes for. And that's kind of another point, is they get their revenue no matter how good or bad of a job they do. Really.
That's right. When you think about it, Bob, it ought to be so self-evident that an economy without profit is an economy in deep depression. What you want is an economy in which businesses are profitable. And what the public school unions ought to want is an economy in which businesses are profitable, because, as you point out, that's what pays the taxes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I think that Ludwig von Mises taught us is that government. The reason why government often fails is because they have no profit motive. They really don't even have prices that much. So they have I think he calls it the calculation problem, where government can't compute a profit. So it doesn't really know whether it's serving its customers, you and I, well. Instead, government seeks to please campaign donors or other type of political goals instead of market goals.
I think a good way to look at it is, let's imagine you've got $100 worth of stuff, and you play around with it, and you create something that people will pay $150 for. And let's say now you made a profit when you go to sell it. Why is that bad? And why is it any better if you take that $100 worth of stuff, play around with it, and put it out there in the market, and now it's only worth $50? There are those, I suppose, who would say, you're altruistic, you care for others, you're not in it for greed. You're not going to be in it at all for very long. But there's nothing inherently bad about profit. It's a measure of the fact that you've added value to society.
And especially if we have competitive markets where there's more than one supplier and so forth, the suppliers kind of get played off against each other to try to keep coming up with better. We see that in the telephone market, the iPhone versus the Android phones, always competing to have better features, and doesn't always work out. Like now, the Samsung's having trouble with the batteries and so forth. But if we still had, I know we are old enough to remember when you had one telephone in your kitchen, it was black.
Yeah, that's right.
It had to be black, and you couldn't move it to another room or anything. If that was still government regulation like that, we would never have things like cell phones.
Oh, absolutely. Or if the government had come in at the time the automobile was invented and said that we can't have this, you're going to have the buggy whip manufacturers go out of business, we would have stagnated. And think of all the jobs that would never have been created. The businesses never formed. The profits never generated. So you got to have growth and progress if you're going to have profits and the ability to even pay the taxes for something like a public school system.
We are in, of course, a presidential election season right now, and it seems that trade, free trade, fair trade, smart trade is a topic now, especially with Donald Trump, I think. He says that we are getting, he says really $500 billion a year is stolen from us by the Chinese. I think 800 or 900 billion by the year. He says Mexico steals 50 or 60 billion dollars a year from us through unfair trade deals. How can trade be unfair? Is free trade good? How do we need to evaluate the claims of Donald Trump and whatever Hillary Clinton would say too?
Well, you have to look at trade from the standpoint of those who actually do the trading. And nobody engages in trade with another person, wherever that other person may be, without the notion that he's going to be better off for having done it. And that's true of both sides. Now, maybe China in any given year sells us more stuff that they've made than they buy from us. And Donald would say, well, that's a balance of trade deficit. But so what? I have a balance of trade deficit with Walmart. I mean, I buy a lot more from them and they buy from me. I have a massive trade deficit. They don't buy anything from me. But the fact is, I benefit from my transactions with Walmart, and they seem to like the same thing as well. So both sides are benefiting. I think that balance of trade deficit thing is a problem that would go away if you just fire the people who compile the numbers. If we didn't know what they were, we wouldn't have a reason to complain.
Because I think earlier today when we were at the Pachyderm Club, you talked about how there really can't be an imbalance of trade. Well, going back to the Walmart example, the money that you give to Walmart in exchange for the stuff you buy, what does Walmart do with that? It doesn't just put it in the bank or in its mattress or something. It goes and trades with someone else to buy goods to stock on their shelves. And it's the same way with countries too, I think, isn't it? Just sometimes we don't realize
Let's say China sells us a lot of stuff. We get the stuff, they get the money. If that's all that ever happened, I would say we still got the better end of that deal. We got real goods. They got pieces of paper with pictures of American politicians on them. But that's not the end of it. They use them to buy either services or make investments in this country, provide capital, helping to fund our deficit that our politicians create, or they turn the dollars into euros and buy things in the European market. Now a European has those dollars. So ultimately, trade is ultimately a two-way street. I do have a problem with some aspects of these so-called trade deals because government's doing negotiating, and sometimes they bake in all kinds of special privileges and stupid favors and what have you. But that's different from trade itself. Trade itself is by definition mutually beneficial when it's free, or neither side would engage in it in the first place.
Okay, well, very good. We need to take another commercial break, so we'll be back in just a moment. This is Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. With me this week, Larry Reed, who is president of the Foundation for Economic Education. So we've been talking about foreign trade between nations. You know, we talk about it between nations. The U.S. trades with China, but really it's not countries so much. It's companies or individuals within the countries trading with individuals or companies in China, Mexico, wherever it may be. So Donald Trump says, yeah, I'm for trade, but it's got to be fair trade, smart trade. Do you know what he means by that?
No, because Donald doesn't know what he means by that. It's one of these rhetorical devices that sound good. Oh, we have to have it fair. But if you really pressed him on it, I'm not sure he'd be able to say what he means by that, because ultimately a trade, when it's voluntary, when it's peaceful, when there's no compulsion to engage in it, it's not bollocksed up by government decrees and mandates, it is by definition fair. Otherwise, one side or the other wouldn't bother to engage in it. So I think it's one of those emotional, populist things that sound appealing. It makes people want to think that, oh, well, he'll go in and he'll do something to make us come out on the better end of trade deals. If he just kept the government out of negotiations involving people, individuals, companies. I think he would do more good than if he got the government into it. When you press him very hard, he talks about wanting to prevent companies from going where they find they can make the highest return. Well, this is not North Korea. Why would we prevent companies from putting their capital to work where they choose to do so?
And I think a prominent example this year has been the Carrier air conditioning or heating company in Indiana that's moving to Mexico, and perhaps Ford Motor Company moving substantial operations there too. And you can understand, you saw perhaps the video on TV of the workers in the Carrier plant when management said, we're moving all your jobs to Mexico. So definitely some people are hurt, but overall we're better off. It's just that it does cause distress for some people.
There's no question, and I feel for those people, especially when I look at the fact that much of their distress is caused by our own government. You know, we impose the highest corporate income tax rate in the major trading industrialized world. And then when companies say, I can move to Ireland and pay half that, then we complain about their moving. Why don't we fix our own house? That's why a lot of this stuff is smokescreen. It's politicians trying to score points with populist appeals without having to actually do the heavy lifting and fix the problem that their own policies have generated in the first place.
So Donald Trump says, okay, Carrier, you moved to Mexico. Now when you try to bring an air conditioner back to the United States, we're going to charge you 35 or 45%, whatever he says, tax on that. That's a tariff, of course. So what's the impact on, let's say, me? My air conditioner in my house, I think, is about due for replacement. What would that do to my life if that tariff came into play?
Every poor or low-income person in America should be offended by that. What they should realize is that this guy is saying that if this company goes to where it can produce air conditioners for me at lower cost so I can get them cheaper, he's going to prevent that. He's going to raise the cost of the air conditioner I'd like to have by 30, 40% just to punish this company. I mean, you know, that's going to hurt the poor and low-income people, not the wealthy and the well-off, who they'll get their air conditioning, but not the little guy.
Yeah, maybe I won't. And these trade wars oftentimes have these trade disputes oftentimes turn into really trade wars. For example, I think it was early on in the Obama administration that China was starting to sell a lot of automobile tires in America, so we added an extra tariff to that. And right away, China turned around and put a tariff on the import of chicken parts. Where are we going to sell our chicken feet if we can't sell them to
These
China
things
now?
almost always have that effect. They cause retaliatory actions. Here we are complaining about China so-called manipulating their currency as if we're, pure as the driven snow. Is there any outfit in the world that manipulates its currency more than the Federal Reserve does? And yet we're out there complaining about other governments that do the same.
Yeah. Well, I think one last topic we have time for today, Larry, the time's really gone by fast, is one of the myths in the book is government must subsidize the arts. And that's kind of irrelevant in Kansas because when our governor came into office a few years ago, he cut off this Kansas Art Commission, caused a huge trouble. Last year, our county commission eliminated some arts funding. And didn't increase zoo. That's not really arts. It's kind of the same thing. Instead of increasing it this much, they kept it at a smaller level. And you think the world was going to end because the government decided not to fund arts in the zoo as much as otherwise. Yeah.
Well, I think the arts are too important to be dependent upon the government. I think when somebody says, the government has to do something for this or that industry, and everybody thinks what they're doing is the most important thing since sliced bread, the artists are no different. But what they're basically saying is only politicians are smart enough to realize how important this activity is. And unless we finance that activity by taking from some and giving to others, it won't happen. That makes me wonder, well, what's so bad about it that you have to use force in order to fund it? So I think any artist worth his salt will find a way to find willing customers or improve his art if he can't find somebody who will buy it. So at a time when government is not doing its core function as well as it ought to, when it's squandering money hand over fist, to think that it ought to be involved in the arts is it's just a grab at other people's money because you're not willing to finance it voluntarily.
So what would those core functions of, let's say, like a county or a city government be that they should concentrate upon?
Well, I think providing a fair and efficient court system so that laws are upheld and implemented and enforced is very important. That implies a police function that's got to be first rate, fair across the board, and efficient. That means prisons for people who have to be incarcerated. And it may even imply such things as roads, although I firmly of the opinion that there are many roads that might be well provided for through other means, private means. We have many of those around the country, toll roads in particular.
And even city streets sometime. I've talked about how we could have the city streets even be privately owned, and people will say, what, you're going to put a toll gate at each block, each merchant collects that?
Yeah.
And I say, well, merchants right now spend a lot of money providing free parking to their customers. Why wouldn't they also provide a free street?
Yeah, exactly.
To get to their store too?
And where do you end? I mean, I'm sort of involved in the arts. I spend much of my time communicating by speech and in the printed word. Why shouldn't I line up for a subsidy? I think what I do is pretty important. But the fact is, I don't quite have the gall to insist that I be paid in a compulsory fashion. If people don't want to read what I write or look at the paintings I might paint, well, then that's their choice. That's their discretion.
And I think this is another example of out-of-market operations. Instead of these artists having to please you and me to buy a painting or attend a play or whatever it is, all they have to do is please some bureaucrats and politicians, which is a very narrow audience.
That's right.
And we usually end up with kind of highbrow art rather than maybe what people really want, which is stock car racing. I don't know what they really want, but if it's what they want, it's what they want, either good or bad.
Exactly. And shame on those people who think that their art is so important that we ought to, at gunpoint, take from other people in order to support it. Let them get off their duff and support their art the best way they know how. That's the way any honest person earns a living.
Yeah. Well, Larry Reed, we've run out of time. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you, Bob.
That's it for this week on Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back again next week. I'm your host, Bob Weeks.